If all he did was make videos about swords and play make-believe outside, I'd have no problem with him. Shad is very disappointing. I used to like his stuff even though it was factually inaccurate. Sometimes it's just fun to look at weapons being used and theorising about how certain fantasy things would work. I remember something about snake people and what weapons they would use. I remember I stopped watching him for a couple of reasons. Firstly, because I remember him saying something incredibly cringy about women, and at the time I started to move away from the side of YouTube that said that stuff, and I also kinda grew up generally. Seeing him now, it's incredibly sad. A guy who I formerly supported would likely hate me for what I am and what I've realised about myself. Fuck, man. Shadiversity used to be among my favourite channels on YouTube. I even read his book. Shadow the Conqueror was actually the motivator for me to take up reading again. Shad's early videos were an inspiration for me to design and write with practicality in mind, and take more interest in history. Now, there were sometimes small moments that seemed a little suspicious, and he certainly wasn't always correct, those being more noticeable as the years went by. But the founding of Night's Watch was when I started to feel that things were likely to go south. I gave their first few videos a chance now. I was concerned after watching their Halo review, but hey, there were legitimate problems with that show that stemmed from the producers not playing the games, so they even had a point. Regardless, Night's Watch wasn't too interesting, so I unsubscribed. It just wasn't jiving with me. I was falling off Shadiversity at that point, but once I saw that thumbnail, there was no looking back. Yellow flags were dyed red, and I unsubbed to all of it. Then I heard of controversy after controversy, more of his opinions getting dunked on, and the flaws in his book were ever more apparent after it became more well read. Overall, his problems as a person and his grift became all the more apparent. This one thumbnail, this one video was the straw that broke the camel's back, the very thing that told me it's time to move on. On his main channel, I was starting to grow tired of his padded content. There was a few fun videos, and the additions of Nate and Tyrant helped offset it, but the videos dragged out and Shad rambled. Night's Watch, for whatever reason, I have a morbid curiosity for, to put it generously, overly critical content. His review of episode 3 of The Last of Us and his not so subtle disdain for the LGBTQ people in that review, and his subsequent ending of reviewing the series, so he never got to gay complain about the Ellie Riley episode, started to drag me away. What really did it was Jack Saint's Nightfall video on Shad, which shone a giant spotlight on many of Shad's weird takes and his awful, narcissistic attitudes. His crazed response to Matt Easton's non-naming distancing post hammered that final nail in the coffin, and I unsubbed from all the channels. Ever since then, I've only been reinforced by Shad's behaviour that I made the right decision. I had basically stopped watching him a while before I even knew about the Night's Watch channel. The last time I remember being invested in his work was when he announced buying that land to build a castle, and then again when he announced his book was going to release. But I started to notice just weird comments here and there, little offhand stuff about his wife, or how since he was the man of the house, something was his job to do. There was one video, I don't remember which, where he basically started talking about how women will never measure up to men in martial arts, no matter how much they train. Little comments like that, or about the LGBT community, just kind of made me realise over time that even if he wasn't being outright bigoted, he holds beliefs that are very biased against several demographics I'm a member of, and that if we met in a room, I'd be unwelcome or subject to a lecture. Then the AI image softwares exploded and I got to watch him get completely ratioed by Arvalis. And I was over him. I'd already drifted well away from his content because of the other stuff I mentioned, but his relationship with AI images and his condescending attitude towards renowned and respected professionals was the point of no return. I used to like his content because he was respectful. I kind of stopped watching him when he went off on nunchucks. It was interesting to think that an equally sized stick would produce the same force, but then the point is that those things aren't the same. You can find two small sticks easier than one large stick. It's also the context of needing to use a tool because weapons are outlawed. He kept doing stuff like that and I felt like he just had to be right all the time. Then all of a sudden, Jack Saint did a thing about his other channel and I laughed pretty damn hard. It honestly breaks my heart a little to hear Shad talking about this stuff. I used to watch him a few years back before he got obsessed with this whole cultural war thing, and his content was always entertaining. Now I get to hear him argue against my existence and suggest that characters like me corrupt kids. It's super disappointing. As a former Shadiversity fan, his blatant bigotry is just sad. At least the mask is off and I can look at elsewhere for good content. I used to be a big fan of Shadiversity, thought it was funny. He mentioned being conservative, but the focus was always on medieval historical content. Whether or not that stuff was good is up for debate, so I kept watching. Then he decided to start his second channel that was more political, and all of a sudden, he couldn't keep his dogshit politics out of his main channel, so I stopped watching. Man, I used to watch his content back in the day and actually liked him, but then I saw some somewhat questionable comments he made and looked into it a little. Found out about this toxic crap, stopped watching him, and now I see these shit videos and I'm just so disappointed in him. As a fellow Aussie, fuck him. Man should have just kept to doing cool sword and mace videos. Now he's literally just on the worst side of every bit of internet discourse. Routinely showcases his own dogshit AI images, constantly going on about how woke stuff is ruining everything, puts out terrible fantasy writing. Genuinely humongous L. I lost interest in his videos long before I found out he was a right-wing lunatic. I found a lot of his content very repetitive and kinda boring. Pretty impressive considering he covered melee weapons and medieval warfare. I couldn't be more disappointed in Shad. I used to highly enjoy his videos about medieval stuff, and since he started this channel, it's all been downhill. It's just been constant conservative bullshit. Yeah, I remember seeing his earlier stuff and thinking he seems chill and interesting. Then a few vids had some red flags and I started to get the ick. Then he just went full send on misogyny and bigotry, and I felt like he just decided to drop the mask. At least his brother seems cool. You know, there was a time when Shad was good, and then he got political. One time I thought, wow, for a Mormon, he's not so bad. Then he shows why I hate all religion. My thoughts are that I'm glad every day that the second thing I ever saw from Shad was him being a complete idiot who has no idea what he's talking about when it comes to criticizing media. Otherwise, I might have become a fan of Goofy Sword Guy and then be disappointed when he turned out to be a bigoted moron. I'm unfortunately not in the same boat. I liked his Goofy Sword Guy stuff. Then the Star Wars sequel trilogy content started to appear in my feed. It's funny, I had no idea why YouTube kept suggesting chuds to me. Once I realised that Shad was a chud and stopped watching his shit, the algo got the picture. The first thing I ever saw with Shad was him discussing the problems with the actual rape they wrote into Wonder Woman 1984, and from what I remember, he covered it pretty well. Granted, it's been years, so I could be misremembering. So I was glancing at what other content he made to see if he might be someone I'd want to watch more of. Goofy Sword stuff seemed fun. Then the dumbass offered the amazing critique of Loki. How does he become an alligator in one timeline? It doesn't make sense. Loki, the master of sorcery, who can shapeshift. A silly little stupid comment, minor in the grand scheme of things, but it made me brush him off as not worth my time, and thank goodness for that. I was a fan of the Goofy Sword Guy stuff until Matt Easton ended their collaborations, and I googled to find out why. Now I stick with Matt's non-Goofy Sword Guy stuff and Skylargrim's sort of Goofy Sword Guy stuff. Yo, no way, the misogynistic sword guy who's wrong about things was wrong again. It really sucks when people who I used to casually enjoy are actually shitty people too. I tried watching Shad's content before I knew his politics before it was so overt, and his videos were 10 times too long and added nothing. They just drew you in with an interesting title. Shadiversity has also been banning anyone who criticises him and his political stances from his subreddit. He claims to be for freedom of speech, but censors and silences his critics. Shad, it turns out, is a religious fundamentalist bordering on extremist. He leans hard into gender roles and traditional ideology. He's extremely regressive and cannot tolerate any forms of progressive characterizations in media. Empowered women, non-straight characters, etc, etc. Night's Watch has always brought this out in him, but there were signs in all the Shadiversity content. There were several instances of gay jokes in them going back over the years, and he casually uses the word retarded to insult and slander people. He wrote a novel a few years ago whose protagonist, I use that term very loosely, is a de-aged serial rapist, murderer, and literal dictator trying to atone for their past behaviour by basically going on a murder spree to kill his former supporters and his own children. This character exemplifies many of the tropes that he ridicules others for. For example, he's said to be the smartest man alive in the book, and he's also imbued out of the blue with essentially godlike powers. He's essentially the Mary Sue character type. But yet, any female character in fiction that Shad doesn't like, he will call a Mary Sue. Considering how bad and cringy his own book is, he has no legs to stand on to criticise other content creators. Shad is an absolutely despicable person, and it's now no surprise why he fetishises life in the Middle Ages, because that's where he'd like to drag a society back to. Former fan of Shad back when he actually did interesting videos about medieval weapons and story ideas instead of the weird Mowoke and AI crap. I knew of his book for the longest time, figured it was probably okay. I never sat down to either listen to it or read it, and if all of this is true, yikes, bro was not well even back then. I was a fan of Shadiversity once, till he began to frequent this kind of people, the grifters and right-wingers that pretend that they aren't right-wingers in the internet, with very few toxic reviews. I tried to warn him, but he didn't listen. Then I realised that he really believes this bullshit, so I quit his channel, not watch it anymore. I fell out of enjoyment with Shad some time ago. His pop culture weapon videos and frame-by-frame Star Wars fight breakdowns were great. Then his format changed when he brought two other guys on, and I enjoyed the videos less. Then I began to see videos such as when cartoons were wholesome, and I knew Shad was on a bad path. I never would have expected him to write about rape or child love. It's simply sad. I used to like his channel when younger, cause ever since I was a kid I was in love with sword fighting, so seeing his downfall was not even surprising, but I am still disappointed. I remember many years ago when he was less unhinged and mostly just doing historical content, he'd come up often when I was looking for multiple sources on things. I'm a writer, genre fiction, historical fiction and otherwise, so it was inevitable I'd come across his content. But I got a bad taste in my mouth from the way he presented some of his information. It seemed like he saw his personal opinion as if it was irrefutable fact. He would occasionally state something which was obviously speculation on his part, and then just continue the video as if what he claimed was 100% true. No source, no examples, and not even a single moment spent explaining why he thought it was the case. Nor would any of the linked sources in the descriptions, which were often sparse, would back it up. Considering I was there to find multiple different sources on a topic, to see what each one missed or disagreed with between them to get a well-rounded and sourced view, having him literally pull information out of his ass very quickly had me blacklist him as a resource. In fact, since I told YouTube to stop recommending his channel years ago, I had no idea about any such controversy until precisely this moment. So in hindsight, blacklisting him as a source was an even better choice than I could have anticipated. I found Shad ages ago for medieval and fantasy themed videos, castle reviews, memes. It was fun. His podcast and other content started to become weirder and weirder, and his views clearly became more and more conservative and right-leaning. The AI art topic made me completely lose interest in him as a content creator and a person. I unfortunately bought the book but found it okay at best. It went on far too long in descriptions of magic, and the main character is so incredibly overpowered he explodes his legs early on and just shrugs it off and regrows them with the magic he was gifted. I liked Shad when he was talking about stuff that he knows. Castles. What happened to this guy? I remember him fondly from his medieval videos that were so interesting and his reviews of Skyrim cities. I disagree that Shadiversity is a grifter. I genuinely believe that he believes what he says. I believe that he is completely honest about his disgusting worldview and politics. I believe that he's genuinely disgusting. I used to watch some of his stuff because the castle and fandom's sword stuff was fun when he was testing these things in his backyard. He didn't go into politics or religion, he just talked about castles and fantasy swords and just seemed like a passionate geek. I did, however, unsubscribe the moment his views came to light, and I haven't read the book. I checked out a fragment of it and couldn't really get past few pages because it was too mind-numbingly boring. I used to like the guy when he was just an amusing enthusiast of medieval era technology and architecture, but then his bigotry started becoming more and more blatant to the point that there was no doubt. Never sounded like his book was any good though. Man, I used to watch Shad back in the day when I was just curating my YouTube bubble and started to venture into HistoryTube and reenactment. I haven't watched these videos for like, I don't know, at least a year and a half, maybe 3? Time is a wibbly-wobbly mess past 3 years, and every time I hear the name again, I learn more and more weird and just deranged info. It's so weird seeing so much shit come out about this guy. I used to be a fan of his because I enjoyed his videos about medieval weaponry, now he just does culture war bullshit. Shadiversity started as a nice channel, a history/fantasy nerd who just shared his ideas. Then he decided to make it a job, but soon realised how short-lived that path would be, and his content became super cringe, from bullying other channels to begging for money to continuously mentioning his religious beliefs. His videos became unnecessarily long and extremely repetitive and confusing, and this was already enough for me to know I didn't want to read any book written by him. I used to be a fan of Shad back when I was a teen and was super interested in medieval facts. I unsubscribed a year or so ago when I started hearing about his politics. As a woman, his rhetoric on females in medieval fantasy grew increasingly concerning to me because he was so against any possible female warrior in fiction to the point that he was livid over pretty innocuous content like a Disney princess who swings a sword in a very obvious cartoon comedy. I went further down the rabbit hole when investigating him to get the sense that he doesn't view women as equal to him and does not care to treat them as people outside of any sexual conversation. It made me feel very objectified to listen to this and to find that he basically only used women as sexual victims in his story and doesn't even care about the trauma they endure in his story. It's very disconcerting. Glad I unsubscribed a while ago. I used to watch his videos when I was younger, thought he was cool. Then I saw a video about his Mario movie outrage and thought, damn, that really sucks that he has such shitty politics. Oh my god, it's so much worse than I thought. Oh my god, never in my life could I have predicted that the what weapons would a centaur use in real life guy was actually this full-on depraved and evil. Back in 2019, Shad was my idol, but when I read his book, it was so terrible. I couldn't believe that he wrote something so evil, so much sexual assault and abuse, it was unreal, and he made the worst person possible the hero of the story. It broke my heart. I really wanted to like Shad, but learning what his book really is has opened my eyes. He's a hypocrite at best and a genuinely terrible person at worst. I really can't watch his content anymore. I used to watch Shad before I found his other channel. I also discovered from other actual swordsman channels that Shad is incorrect on a lot of things and doesn't respond to criticism well when called on it. I liked Shad's content, but at some point he moved to political commentary, which honestly does not fit his character or content, and since then alienated me. I liked it when I could just come on and look at his new videos about medieval weapons, sorcery, culinary tastes, medieval life, and nunchucks. What is a guy like him talking about politics and beefing with other YouTubers is strange. I understand it gets clicks, but I can't say I enjoy the new direction of his content. I remember watching him back in high school and he was really fun to watch, even though a lot of what he said turned out to be wrong. I stopped watching him and other similar channels because I felt like the range of things to talk about had dried up. Seems that he's probably come to the same conclusion. It's funny, I stopped watching Shad's videos several years ago because his historical stuff was frankly not incredibly well researched. There were countless other folks on YouTube producing far superior content in that area. Now, in the last couple of days, my recommended video feed is full of videos about Shad doing manosphere and /or right-wing political stuff. First, no idea why this stuff started cropping up on my recommended list. Second, YouTubers be crazy. It's really sad. I used to like Shad when all he made was medieval content. Then he started to let his religious and political views get into his YouTube more and more, and as a non-religious leftist, I just couldn't listen to the dumb shit he said non-stop. Thankfully, Skal is still doing good shit. I used to watch Shad for some of his historical /weapon content before I suddenly had the epiphanous realization one day that literally nothing he says is all that knowledgeable, intelligent, or profound. He just spouts the most basic facts at you like a third grader doing a school project. There's literally no point listening to him, just read the Wikipedia page for whatever he's talking about and you'll learn way more about it. And that was before his right-wing, traditionalist cringe arc really took off. I used to love Shad's content back when he mostly covered pop culture analysed and just reviewed swords and stuff. Then he got all snobby and elitist, shat on the katana for a living, and then got more and more political. I actually kinda used to like Shad for some of this discussion of medieval and so on weapons. I forget when I fell out with him, but eventually went back and looked and just, no, bye Shad. It's really sad. Shad was kind of an okay guy just talking about history and fantasy stuff and about his books. Sometimes he mentioned he was a Mormon, but obviously being locked indoors over the lockdown fried his brains. The reason why I stopped liking him was something really silly. It's how arrogant he is when it comes to sword stuff, when most content creators say the hidden blade from Assassin's Creed is exactly that, a hidden blade for stabbing, and he says, lol, it doesn't cut, how are you supposed to fight with this? It's so extremely dense that it makes a lead pipe seem smart. I used to watch his videos, I actually liked them until I started getting bad vibes. Dude will blame YouTube not liking him for being conservative for why his videos are doing worse over time, despite conservative content doing gangbusters on this site. I knew he was getting bad and stopped watching almost all of his content, but as I watched House of the Dragon, I just had to watch so many videos on it, so I watched his along many others, and he kept constantly bringing up that one of the writers of the show is a feminist. Well, I can say sure if that's an issue for you, but he kept bringing up how he was surprised that this feminist wasn't adding their politics to the show. Every single episode, he said this multiple times. Probably because he knew if he wrote it, he would damn well have layered it with his. It's a shame, his testing of historical and fantasy weapons is really cool, but there was always something about his competitiveness that gives me the ick. Was a fan of Shad for ages, loved his medieval stuff on YouTube, but lost all respect I had for him. Used to be a fan of Shad because I was really into military history and thought he knew what he was talking about. Then he started getting really obsessed with how good he was at everything, constantly promoting himself in this fake humble way, and I started losing respect for him. AI art was the final straw on the camel's back, or maybe I should say log, because AI art is just so off-putting to me. People who are truly good and passionate about something have a much more humble and open attitude. I don't know if it's the Dunning-Kruger effect or insecurity with him, but I hope he stops promoting his AI garbage and steps off his high horse for a moment. Must admit, I followed Shad on his history channel for a few years, and although I found his sense of humour getting increasingly shit, and noticed he'd brought in some other non-funny or particularly informative guys to his channel, didn't know about his weird right-wing views or religion. Some of his older stuff was quite good, but had a bit of a Graham Hancock feel to some bits. Then finding out Scholarglad had disassociated with him seemed odd. Going to do a bit more research before passing judgment, but generally, religious right-wing people are not high on my credibility list. I was watching Shad years ago, not gonna lie, he helped me to pursue my hobbies, to be a better GM, to be creative. Then due to university, work, social life, I stopped for some time and returned to watch his videos about 5 months ago. Holy shit, that is not the guy I started watching. Don't know what happened from nerd speaking about nerdy things, he became a pompous ass who constantly says me, me, me. Where the original cast with the big guy from Police were wholesome dudes that wanted to make entertainment, now it's a cast of snacky assholes who look down on everything and you can see they think are better than others. And the politics, why the politics? For the love of chaos gods, who thought talking politics and religion is good for this channel? Fell off of Shad when he made a video pretending a fictional sword that couldn't exist in the Book of Mormon was real. I originally found Shad when he just was talking about castle design and architecture. When he revealed he was worse about issues than most medieval aristocrats would have been, I can't express how disappointed I was. Yeah, around the time he started turning his friends into employees in the videos, he started getting real childish. The big thing for me was in a video about mole ninja weapons where he said something like, "Don't be such a virgin," and then highly recommended getting married before sex. I tried a few more videos after that, but they just kept getting more childish and more right-wing. I remember watching his videos a few years back. I don't think he was nearly as publicly fragile as he seems to be nowadays. Part of me wonders if I just missed the signs or if there was some drop-off point where his popularity started to swell his ego. I used to watch his channel some years ago, then I started to get annoyed by his opinions and his constant complaints about stuff I don't care about and his right-wing takes. Suddenly, I noticed similar whining behaviours from other YouTubers who I placed in the same kind of scene. Now I just follow Matt from Scholar Gladiatoria and Scalagrim. Very cool and mature individuals. Man, I used to watch this dude occasionally at a time when I was wanting to learn more about the minutiae of medieval weapon systems. He eventually fell out of my algorithmic, not because of his right-wing takes, I was today years old when I found out about those, but because of all of the various weapon tubers, he was easily the most boring. I can't imagine reading a book from him. Oh, Shadiversity. I had enjoyed his videos and Scalagrims about European weaponry and martial arts. Then I found out Shad is a raging conservative. I had to unfollow and turn away from him after that. It's so depressing to see how far Shad has fallen. I used to be a big fan of his, but then I look away for what feels like a month and suddenly he's dived headlong into misogyny, AA art and slurs. I used to be a fan but got concerned when Shad referred to She-Ra as subversive with thinly veiled disgust. Came back a while later, disappointed to see he was further down the pipeline. I remember I occasionally used to see his videos looking at fictional swords years ago and thought his channel looked interesting. Good to know he's actually a misogynistic twat. What a miserable, moronic muppet. I used to love Shad. His content was really interesting and I was really into YouTubers doing history content. Skylagrim, Lindy Beige and Shad. Then Shad showed the fact that he's an absolute raving lunatic and I immediately stopped watching anything of his. Lindy's a bit iffy here and there, but I still like him. Don't know of anything bad about Skylagrim. Hope there isn't anything, lol. Man, I really liked his sword content, but he really just keeps going headfirst into douchery. Shad is fucking deranged. I watched a few of his videos because I love history, but I noticed kernels of batshit starting to leak out. Then I started watching one video that was practically indistinguishable from Tucker Carlson, and I just stopped watching all of his shit entirely. Stay in your lane, armor nerd. You don't know shit about politics or sociology, and my god does it show. I miss when this guy talked about castle matriculations instead of his shitty opinions about marginalized people. Man, remember when Shad talked about like implementing historical realism into fantasy? Why are so many YouTubers just swan diving into transphobia, racism, and misogyny? You'd think this was the hate Olympics. A few years back, I watched Shad and got these shitty vibes off him. I couldn't find anything to confirm those feelings, but now, with all this stuff coming up, I feel validated. I can't believe there was a time I ever watched this guy. I stopped when he did that rant video about mortal engines being too unrealistic even for fantasy. I used to like Shad until I got into HEMA directly, and then I started watching other historical YouTubers / HEMA YouTubers, and it became clear that Shad was always a fucking moron. Dude's entire success was banking off of the idea that no one he was talking about or to had any knowledge of the topics he was covering, because he is just flat out wrong about 80% of the shit he talks about. The funny thing is, I used to actually respect Shad and watch his stuff on occasion. Then he let it slip that he pays for the Daily Wire, and I started to take a more critical eye to him. Man's a sham. I used to watch this guy back in the day, Bearing too, which I am fantastically ashamed to admit. However, in my defense, and this is the funny part, which is really sad for people like Shad and Bearing, I was a 5th grader. I stopped watching Shad a few years ago when he started his Night's Watch thing with his friends. It was like the 2nd or 3rd installment, I think, and he let one of his buddies say something transphobic without any pushback at all. Now that I'm hearing him do the anti-woke DEI alarm klaxons bullshit, I'm even more glad that I followed my intuition and stopped watching him. I stopped watching him years ago because he said he agreed with Matt Walsh about woman fighting, that and his constant whining about the Star Wars sequel trilogy. However, his brother Jazza is a much better person in my opinion.